Grief is something that we really teach a lot of people at Celebrate Recovery how to do well. I did not know how to grieve well when I started Celebrate Recovery. It's why I was stuck in a lot of places in my life. And I think that it's important that we kind of, before we dive into our spiritual inventory, understand a really good concept of some of the reasons our body might be saying it's really scary to go into some of the things that we put on our spiritual inventory list, because we're anticipating having to go through the grief that we haven't gone through on a lot of issues. And that's why it can be a little bit overwhelming. And so I kind of want to pause from going forward into spiritual inventory and talk about grief almost in a way to like prepare your body to know what's coming when you do dive into that. So Chad is really great. He's going to pull the drawer out here. Look at this, you guys.
Try not to hide.
We're going to put it right here. Only a couple of light reflections on this thing. This is my dry erase board. I almost had a permanent marker. So I'm going to talk briefly about grief and give you just a practical tool that you can sit down and write out, whether it's on a piece of paper or a dry erase board or something that you feel comfortable doing. I've had people do it on a computer too, but I kind of like the tangible thing. And this is called a grief timeline. And so I would encourage you, if you have already done your spiritual inventory, you've already been through a step study and done that process, it's still good to consider this. If you haven't, this is actually a really great place to start before you dive into some of those things. And so it's two-part. The first part really just logistically. Almost like kind of when I tell people to do their testimony, I'll say, well, just start like, here's where I was born. Chad always starts his testimony with,
I was born in Paducah, Kentucky.
Where were you born? How many siblings do you have? Where did you live? What happened in elementary school? What happened in junior high? What happened in high school? And just kind of chronologically go and tell your story that way. It's a great way to kind of attack a testimony. Which, by the way, if you haven't written your testimony yet, we're going to be looking for those in about a month when we get back together live. So please get your testimony written. In the meantime, this grief timeline. So I'm going to put a little marker here, and this is when I was born. When I was born. Okay, and then I'm just going to do this, and this is an active timeline of my life. And I know you can't really see this, so I'm just going to kind of talk through a little bit of the markers. But for me, when I went through this, this was actually a model given to me by a woman named Renee Blakely. She used to be at New Heights Church and lost a teenage daughter in a car accident. It was really sad, and she had to grieve herself. And in her own process, very similar to Celebrate Recovery, in her own process, the healing that happened for her, the grief that she experienced, she was able to walk other people who went through something similar. And so she taught a class on grief, and I took it and downloaded this for the first time. And then this is something that we've incorporated in a lot of our stuff, not only at the Joshua Center, but in a lot of the teachings that I've done. But you start with this timeline, and you just put a little marker on any events where there was loss. And the marker width and length is based on the severity of how bad the grief was. Yeah. So for me, when I was little, I had a pet. We lost a pet. That's just a little one. Pet loss is often a big deal, but when I was really little, I didn't know. Then we moved from Canada back to the United States. And so I have a lot of these moving ones. I lost another pet in high school. My grandfather died. My grandmother actually died. My father's mother died. And so there's these little kind of hashtags that go, now it kind of looks like a football field as we continue. And so I'm going to put here, pet, move, this was another pet, this was another move, we moved a lot, this was my grandmother, this was my grandfather. Very logistically, I'm not really diving into emotion yet. And I'm just going to kind of go, okay, this happened, then this happened, I continued on, I had a divorce, left the church. That community was really, really hard. Obviously, the charges that I had faced and the process of just that whole experience was really hard and scary for me. And then I continued. About here is when I found CR. Still had to grieve some stuff. A couple of miscarriages, and now that puts me here. There I am at the end of this. And I probably should have done this sideways. But I wanted to keep Chad in the shot as well. And so once I kind of get the logistics down, this is the basic, now he's disappearing, the basic line. I want to now come back and go ask a couple of questions. Question one is, did I grieve this? It's a really easy one. Did I grieve? Did I grieve my pet? Probably not. I was little. I didn't really know what was going on. Did I grieve my move from Canada? No. I was probably about 4. I didn't understand the weight of what moving meant to me. Did I grieve the next pet? And I believe that pet, we left him with my uncle. He was a hunting dog, and my uncle had hunting dogs. Never really quite understood what happened. That was Lucy, actually, a little dog that I had. And the next move didn't. By this time, all of our moves were spun in a positive way. So I wasn't able to take in that I would be losing something. Right? We talked last week about those ditches. The idea that it is great when you're kind of pitching to a family or pitching to those, hey guys, great opportunity. Dad got a new job. We get to move closer to our family. Positive spin on it. But what I didn't get to do was go, wait a minute, I'm leaving friends behind. I had consistency and structure in school, and so there was some sadness. And so I had to kind of, on my own timeline, come back and go, no was the answer to this question on so many of these. And so oddly enough, if no was the answer, guess what my body still needs to do to be able to go and clean up some of the residue of this stuff?
It's great.
Grieve.
Yeah.
And so what I needed to do was come back and write a little bit about the first pet that I lost. It was a cat. Her name was Fluffy. She got feline leukemia, and we donated her actually to the
LSU
Louisiana State University Veterinarian Hospital so that she could help other cats. Also, there was the positive spin on.
That's it.
But I came back and wrote a little blurb about her and just kind of was grateful and processed it just a little bit. Same with the move to Canada. Same with the next pet. And even journaling, which is what we do in our Celebrate Recovery books, is we write that stuff down and then we share it. Yeah. Whether you share this with a good friend, a spouse, if you have a spouse that you feel safe sharing stuff with, or an accountability partner or a sponsor, being able to process some of this grief helps us clean out the residue of things that we haven't really felt. Go ahead, Chad. You were going to say something.
I was going to say, somebody asked a question. It's a great question. But I want to answer some of this. I'm just thinking a couple things. So it is a funny thing, grief, because it's not, and you might be going here in a minute or maybe you're not, but it's important to make sure you acknowledge both the good. So it's kind of like sometimes we get spun a little bit like moving, but you want to acknowledge the things you lost. Well, it could be both sides. The good things you lost, like moving away from Canada. Well, I'm gonna miss this good part of it. So I'm gonna miss the friends. I'm gonna miss the house. I'm gonna miss the good snow or whatever. And then it's like, but I'm also not gonna miss some things about that thing. You know, like everybody kind of speaking a weird language and saying "a" and I don't know whatever they did. But I mean, I think it's important to hold both sides of what you're losing, right? So the good stuff, that's the stuff we're going to miss, right? But then also the challenging things, and every relationship has challenges. If Angela were to, and I don't want this, I love her so much, I don't want her to go anywhere, but like if something bad happened to Angela and she died, I would have to think about what are the really good things about Angela, what are the things I loved about Angela, what are the things that I'm going to miss, right? But then what are the also challenging things, or the things I didn't get to resolve with her? So that's when grief really gets complicated. And so I think it kind of goes
deal with those things later tonight.
Goes to the question that was asked. Does this work with different things such as PTSD, anxiety, depression? Well, I would say that all of those things are things that have not really been processed. So if we're saying that PTSD, what they do for PTSD is they walk you back through the memory and kind of have you remember and notice and pay attention to the things that have happened in that memory. With depression, I have a friend of mine that says that depression is almost always unresolved grief. So people won't want to go into what it is that, maybe we never dealt with grandpa's issues, and
Yeah.
nobody says anything about him, and he abused or did other things, and so then we don't talk about it, but then our body's kind of like, well, what do we do with this? And finally, it kind of shuts you down, and that's a lot of times, and I'm not saying that there's not chemical depression, but a lot of times that's what happens, is that your body has kind of given up hope on resolving your grief. And that a lot of times leads to depression. Same thing with anxiety, and I'm almost done, Ange. I see you thinking. But same thing with anxiety, right? If we don't resolve, if we don't go into our anxiety and say, what are you telling me, right? Then it becomes this kind of unresolved thing, and it runs kind of as anxiety until your body gets hopeless and kind of goes a lot of times to depression.
Yeah.
And so ignoring the message that your body's telling you, that anxious message, which may be directly related to grief, right? So we've left something, we've lost something, we're scared we might lose something, and we're trying not to be anxious, trying to put on a happy face and show up for the people around us. And if we do that well, what happens is we ignore our own body's message, and then it finally fights back sometimes by throwing depression out, or panic attacks, or other things. So listening to the messages that are embedded in our gut, and I truly believe that grief is one of the most important things that we do, not in recovery, but also in recovery, just as humans.
Yeah.
I mean, this is basically what we're doing all the time. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I love it. I wanted to come back to when I mentioned, do it logistically first, and then come back and give weight to the line if it was more important, or if it important is then maybe not the right word I want to use, heavy or harder to go through. And so I want to say for a second, let's say it wasn't necessarily in my past, but let's say you have a really hard, something that happened in childhood. Maybe it was abuse, the loss of a parent, a sibling, something that was really, really heavy. And I'm just going to, on this, denote it by putting a really thick and big black line. Okay, let's say this was something really, really big. And I'm coming through here, I've written the timeline, there's the line, and I've just gone all the way to the end, logistically. And now I want to come back and process it. He's really worried that I'm going to write on his face over there. I'm coming through here. What I can do is the same thing that I told you about. First, write a little bit about that pet, and almost go like, yep, grieve that. Write a little bit about that move. Yep, grieve that. Write a little bit about this. Yep, grieve that. I in my body know I am not ready for this, and so I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to keep on going. Because here's the thing. All of these little bits of grief have left residue, exactly what Chad is saying, unresolved. And if we can go in and clean up some of this residue and make more space, not only does it help us with the process of healthy grief, knowing how to balance the good and the bad, knowing how to take the time needed to really kind of sit and invite somebody else into the feelings that we have around those events, but also it cleans up some of that miscellaneous residue from something like a pet or something like a move. While there is grief in transitions and there is grief in change, obviously losing a pet isn't going to be as big as some of these other really, really big things. My divorce, my charges, those things were really heavy for me, and I really had to sit in what was good from my marriage and what was bad, what came out of it. A lot of people will ask me about the events that happened in my life. Do you regret it? Obviously, there's remorse, there's regret, there's failure, there's consequences. And yet, because I've done a balanced grief line, I can go, but here's what I know, is that was the thing that brought me to my knees. That was the thing that got Jesus into my heart for that redemption and mercy that I needed. That was a turning point in my relationship with Christ. And so for that reason, I'm grateful that I was able to go through that. Am I grateful for the event? No. I've mourned it. I've grieved it. I've processed it. I've repented for it. I've done the things that I needed to do. But also, it's not something that I'm full of shame with, even though I'm ashamed of it, because I know that it was that event that brought me to the cross. And so there are events that happen that are bad, horrific events that we can go, wait a minute. Also, during that time, I kind of talk about, I learned how to play the guitar, and I love to play the guitar. And so I remember, wait a minute, during that season, something creative was born, something creative that I now in worship give back to God. And so it's important that we kind of our body might want to block out a season because it was really a hard, heavy season. But what we do when we block out the whole thing is we miss that there might have been things in there that were important. There might have been things in there that also have influenced who we are that we need to take. And so we keep going, check, check, check. Then we go, okay, at the end of it, did I grieve the good and the sad parts?
Or I want to change this just to kind of the bad, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to...
Because
That's dry erase is great. There, like my sounds too. Good and bad.
Yeah. So the good thing, I was thinking about Kona. Whenever we lost Kona,
oh, yeah.
I know, it's sad.
Kona was a dog that I had. He was 13, almost 14 years old, and I had him through my divorce, through multiple moves. He was like, I could tear up if I think about it.
I know, it's sad. We're talking about grief. I didn't mean to punch you in the face, I'm sorry. But thinking about the good and the bad, right? And so, like, it was good. He was a good dog. We loved him. We're going to miss him. He was loyal. He was protective. All these things, right? But kind of by the end of his life, there was a lot of bad, too.
Yeah.
He clearly had pain, I think, in his hips or cancer. I mean, he had all kinds of weird things going on. He was a Akita Shepherd
mix in Arkansas. He would blow out his coat. There was hair everywhere. There were some things that were favorable.
So there were some challenging things, kind of bad things that we're not necessarily going to admit or miss, but we're going to go, okay, we'll miss the good things. We'll miss your comfort. We'll miss these things, but we're also going to be kind of relieved in some ways. And I think sometimes when somebody passes away, or when a pet passes away, or you lose a job, or whatever the thing is, I think sometimes it feels almost like dishonoring to like spend some time saying these are the things I'm not going to miss. Yeah. And I just want to say it's really important to have a good side, the bad side.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's something else that I want to mention that I think is worth just kind of bringing up. Now it just left my brain. Hold on, it'll come back in a second. Talk for a little bit.
I want to say, okay, so this is something I do with a lot of people when I'm talking about grief. I'll say, I want you to sit down and I want you to think about what you want to say, especially if it's somebody you've lost. And I would encourage you guys, if you feel comfortable, if you're in a safe place, a stable place, and you think, hey, I want to work on this, you can sit down and you can write a letter to somebody that you've lost.
Yes.
And I always say, just start off with, hey, I love you, I miss you. These are some things that we really had a great time with. And then like paragraph 2 is, here are the things that I really miss. These are the good things about our relationship and the things that we went through. And this is, how you taught me this or what we did that or whatever it is. And then I want to take another paragraph and just say, and here are some things that weren't so good.
Yeah.
These are the things I'm not going to miss. These are some things I didn't get to say maybe I was sorry for. Or maybe I wish you had been able to say you were sorry for the things that you did or how you died or whatever the thing might be. And then the final paragraph is normally just saying, I loved you, these were good things, these were bad things, and now we're going to say goodbye, and that you're always, a piece of you will be with me, because I don't think that we ever really lose them fully, but that in this life I'm gonna close this chapter, sort of. So.
And let's say you need to have that letter writing process, or even in the amends when we do and I keep kind of pointing down here, referencing the book. Let's say you need to make amends, but to do so would harm them or others, but you still need to get the words out. Writing a letter that you're never going to send is a great thing to do, just to process that. So there's 2 other points. I wrote a little note up here so I'd remember. One, Chad and I, when we were processing what we were going to talk about tonight and brought this up, I remember reading one time a guy from AA who wrote a breakup letter to alcohol. And it was very similar to this. And he kind of started with alcohol, I am breaking up with you. We've had a good run. You were at all my parties. You were there at my big events. You helped me numb out the pain and not think about things that I was trying to avoid. But now you've gotten destructive in my life, and it's time for us to be over. It's time for us to end this. Here are the bad things that you're doing. Here is what you're causing in my life. And so because of this reason, we're done, and I'm moving on from you and grieving the loss of you. And it was a really powerful letter that did this very process, grieved something that we've relied on. We have a lot of these tendencies that are reliant, and our body trusts them, but they're bad for us, they're unhealthy for us. And so part of the process of change, of growth, is for us to be able to say goodbye to those old strategies and move into something else. And so we have to let our body know we are going to not only grieve the reasons we use the strategies is because they work sometimes, but also we have to acknowledge the bad that they cause and grieve those.
Yep.
And so it could be that you have to say goodbye to an addiction, a hurt habit, or hang up, or something like that, not only a person or an event or a change. There's one other thing that I want to say before we kind of wrap up this idea. Now that you're in recovery, now that you are, unless you're brand new, and even if you are brand new, you're about to get acquainted with a team of people who want to walk you through this process. But let's say you've been in recovery for a while and you have a somewhat of an understanding of the process of writing down an inventory, inviting people into our pain, sharing our stuff with a sponsor, inviting God in. We've talked about a lot of these concepts. Your ability now as an adult who's been in recovery, your ability to look back on a hard event that happened in your past and have a more mature and a more spiritual perspective is really likely. And so what happens is our body processes some of these really big events. Like, let's say we want to come back to this event that happened when I was 6 or happened when I was 8. My body only had the emotional and mental and spiritual capacity of an 8-year-old. And even though as I grew, I was trying to process some of it, the memory of that was 8. And so now that I've come down my timeline and I'm an adult and I can go, wait a minute, I've got to go back into that. There are times when we go back in and we say, God, now that I am who I am today, knowing that all of these events and experiences have shaped me, can you help me go back into this event and now show me where I've assigned meaning that might not have been true, or show me where you were in this tragic event that happened to me, where I lost my innocence or lost something in my life, or help me understand why I lost a parent, a sibling, things that were really valuable that have hurt me in my life. And give me a more mature, more spiritually mature, emotionally mature perspective so that I can grieve what I really need to for that event. Not like a 6 or 8 or 10-year-old who was in it, but now as an adult looking back, trying to assign new meaning and new understanding of some of these events. That really is what our inventory is about as well. Inviting someone else in, considering it, kind of turning the light on in the dark space and cleaning it up so that we can move forward with it where there's not residue.
It's great.
Anything else you want to add?
I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I think our time is
drawing
good,
close to
drawing
the end.
nigh.
Yeah.
I'm not going to add anything. Okay. That's really good. I was just sitting there thinking, if you're stuck with grief, or if you say, oh man, I can't even talk about this. Well, first of all, I'd say is get with your sponsor.
Yeah.
Right? And see if you can process through some of it, if you have a sponsor that's safe.
Or a therapist, even. Let us help you refer.
That was the second thing.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that exactly. Get in with a therapist. Get with somebody. And I'll tell you what, if you're going to see a therapist and you come in and you give them this grief timeline and you say, here are the 2 or 3 big things that I really need to work through, it just makes it easy. I mean, I say, not just working through it, but easy for the therapist, right?
Yeah.
They can kind of go, okay, let's go target this thing. And if you're seeing a therapist and you're thinking, man, they're kind of avoiding this big thing, they may not remember that big thing, just to give them a little bit of a break, and just say, hey, we need to go back to this. I still think about this, because I know that a lot of us see therapists and do that sort of thing. So I want to just encourage you, take, like you should with your medical care, but with your mental health care, take a little bit of charge with that. Say, ask for those things to be met or to be done, because we all are just human. Yeah. Anyway.
And so a grief timeline. Take a piece of paper. Yeah. I did this and then realized I needed another piece of paper. So then I had like 3 papers taped together sideways. Then I rewrote it. There's a lot of ways that you can do this, but I mostly just wanted you to kind of get started on it. Maybe you're thinking back, like there are 1 or 2 events that happened in my life that I know I didn't grieve well, and I need to start with those. It's a great place to start. Starting anywhere, grieving something you haven't is a great place to start.
Yeah, for sure.
Specifically knowing when I got the call this week that we were going to be kind of allowed to meet again, I was excited about it, and then something else came up. Something that, because I processed it, I realized was grief. Because I have loved kind of having the time with my family. There are some very great things that Chad and I and Avery and even Chad's mom Janie has been kind of joining us for dinner regularly. We have someone staying with us. We've really enjoyed her company. We've had like family dinners together that have been really a blessing. And I think, man, when we roll back into life, it's probably not going to be the way we knew it, the new way. There are some good things that I want to take with me. And so for me, I even kind of sat down and I was like, okay, what am I not going to miss? And I'm ready to dive back in. What are some things that were really important that I picked back up that I want to carry with me into this season? So that's kind of what prompted us to be able to do this talk tonight, was that just about the time, right? We're 8 weeks in, and we're going to get to the end of May. So it was like March, April, May. We're 3 months into life having transitioned, and 3 months is just enough for it to sink in. And guess what we're going to do? Change it all again, which is hard for us. And so while there are some things that we're excited to, which is obviously getting to hang out in person with you guys again, there's going to be change. This is bringing more change. And so I would just encourage you, if you need to process grief or need to slow down and go, what even in this season, what is good, what isn't so good, and how can I move forward? That will help this not get stuck in this timeline.
That's great.
Thank you for letting me share. I'll bring it to a close.
You're good, man.
Yeah,
That's
thanks.
Nice.
I think it's important, so important. I tell people all the time that Celebrate Recovery is a place where I teach adults how to grieve and learn how to grieve myself. It's something that's been really important.